Hello, we're going to go over the FIFO and weighted average equivalent units methods as well as overhead applied and predetermined overhead calculations for Chapter 3. Going back to problems number 35 and 36, we're looking at a t-shirt manufacturer and trying to identify the related ending inventory costs as well as the cost of goods manufactured that should be transferred over to finished goods. In order to do that, we look at our beginning work in process, our current period production, and our ending work in process, and the percentages that those have been completed. You can see that I've set up the problem side by side so we can compare afterwards the difference between the two methods. As mentioned in class, there are 4 steps to calculating the cost that should be transferred to finished goods. The first step is to calculate the physical flow of units. There's 2 parts to the first step. The calculation first of the units that were completed, and then the calculation of the units started and completed. This is where the 2 methods start to differ. In order to calculate the number of units completed, we go back to what we learned in Chapter 2. We take our beginning units plus the units started during the period minus our ending units. Oops, sorry about that. So for this problem, we're going to start with 20,000 units. 85,000 were done during the period, and our ending units are 12,000. So our units that were completed during the period are 93,000. Then we bring this over to step B, where we calculate the units started and completed. So we're going to start with our units completed, which we just calculated above. And then we subtract from that our beginning units. In this case, 20,000. Okay, so that gives us units started and completed of 73,000. Okay, for the FIFO method, we assume that the beginning units are the first used. Therefore, we subtract that from the units completed. We already know the costs associated with that, so it's not part of the calculation of equivalent units. Then we move on to step 2, which is calculating the equivalent units. The difference between step 1 and step 2 is that step 1 uses the whole entire units listed above, whereas step 2, we need to convert this information into equivalent units based on the percentages completed. So again, we'll start with our beginning WIP, which is going to be the 20,000 units in beginning inventory times the remaining amount that we need to complete during the current period. So we started with 25% of them being completed. Therefore, we still need to complete 75%. So 20,000 times 75%. That gives us 15,000 units. Then we add the started and completed in period, which is what we calculated above, of 73,000 units. And then finally, we're going to calculate our ending WIP equivalent units, which is going to be the 12,000 units times what we completed during the period. Because this is ending work in process, we know that we completed 70% of this during this period. So we're going to multiply it by 70%. So let's do the calculation, 12,000 times 70%. That gives us a total equivalent units of 96,400. So total equivalent units completed in period. Okay. So this is going to be used in the next step. Step 3, the calculation of costs per unit. So here we know that our equivalent units is 96,400, which we calculated in step 2. Now we need to identify the costs, the production costs. Under the FIFO method, we're assuming that the inventory in beginning inventory has already been completed. It's the first in, first out. So those costs we know would automatically transfer to cost of goods manufactured into finished goods. So we're going to focus on these costs, the $160,024. So that's the cost that we're going to look at to identify the cost per equivalent unit. So it's going to be the 160 divided by the equivalent units of 96,400. So it gives us a cost per equivalent unit of 166. And then finally, the fourth step is calculating the cost of the ending work in process inventory and the cost of goods manufactured that'll be transferred to finished goods. So let's start with what we know we have in ending inventory. We're going to take the equivalent units that are remaining in inventory. So it's the 12,000 times 70%. So it's 8,400 times multiply by our cost per equivalent unit from above, which is 166. And that gives us costs of $13,944. So this is the production costs in ending inventory. This will be the beginning production costs for next period. Okay, and now to calculate our cost of goods manufactured, we're going to take our total costs incurred in total cost for the period, which is going to be the 42 plus the 160, and we're going to subtract ending inventory costs that we calculated above, which is the 13,944, and that gives us our costs of goods manufactured that need to be transferred to finished goods, which is 188,856. I know I went through that kind of fast, but ultimately this is our goal, is to calculate the amount of production costs that total our cost of goods manufactured that move to the next step in finished goods. Let's look at how this differs for the physical flow of units for weighted average. So it's the same exact process to start with. We're going to take our beginning units, 20,000, our current production of 85, and subtract our ending. So this will give us units completed during the period of $93,000. 93,000 shirts. These are shirts that we're talking about. Now here is where the two methods start to diverge. Remember that we talked about for the weighted average method, we're going to assume that all of the production happened during the current period. Therefore, they're assuming that this beginning WIP does not exist and it's part of the current period production. So we're going to take, just to follow the same process, it's going to be the units completed from above, 0 for beginning work in process. Therefore, our units started and completed during the period under the weighted average method is simply the 93,000. This is where the two methods start to differ. Now we calculate our equivalent units. Again, it's a similar process. we're going to take the beginning WIP, which, as we just discussed, for weighted average is 0. We assume 0 for weighted average. So our started and completed, we calculated above as 93,000. And then our ending WIP is the same under both methods. It's the 12,000 times the 70% that we completed during the period. That gives us our 8,400, and the sum of those two, whoops, oh, I'm having difficulty with typing in a formula. So our equivalent units completed in the period is 101,400. Now we're going to calculate our cost per equivalent unit. So because we're assuming that the beginning units took place during the current period, we're going to look at the entire production costs. Okay, so we're going to look at the 42 plus the 160. And then our equivalent units, just copying the formulas over, is going to be what we calculated above. And then our cost per unit is the production costs divided by the equivalent units. I'll be posting this spreadsheet on Engage as well if you need to refer back to it. And now we're going to do the same process to calculate the cost of ending work in process inventory and cost of goods sold. So going back, our ending inventory is going to be the same, the 12,000 units times 70% is 8,400. Our cost per unit is $2. Therefore, our production cost in ending inventory is 8,400 times $2, which is 16,800. Again, we'll look at our total production costs for the period, less what remains in ending inventory to calculate our cost of goods manufactured that's going to transfer over to finished goods. So you can see the costs of goods manufactured are different between the two methods. Not significantly so, but different nonetheless. And you can also see the variance in the two methods side by side. Let's do another example, 37 and 38. So again, it's going to be the same process. This time we're looking at a paper manufacturer and reams of paper. So we're going to start with the physical flow. Again, it's going to be beginning units plus current production less ending units. Okay? And again, we're looking at whole units. We're not doing equivalent units yet. So it's going to be beginning, current, ending.